What if I told you Boeing once designed a monster 50-seat jumbo jet? Not necessarily to revolutionize travel, but to potentially bankrupt Airbus. Welcome to one of the most intense high-stakes game of corporate poker in aerospace history. The year is around 1999. The aerospace industry is watching a collision course. Airbus is aggressively gearing up to launch the A3XX, the massive double-decker giant that we all know today as the A380. In response, Boeing unveils a leviathan of their own, the 747X. To a lot of industry insiders, the 747X was pitched as the ultimate evolution of the Queen of the Skies. But there's a massive twist to the story. Many analysts at the time believed this paper plane was the ultimate bluff. A $4 billion decoy created solely to fracture the market, steal just enough orders, and got Airbus into spending tens of billions on a super jumbo project that would ultimately bleed them dry. Was the 747X a genuine engineering marvel? Or was it the greatest corporate deception of the 20th century? We are going to get into all of it. The airport infrastructure wars and the monster specs. So pull up a chair, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. And let's discuss exactly what the 747X was. To really understand the 747X, we have to talk about the battlefield of the late 90s. For 3 solid decades, Boeing had held an absolute undisputed monopoly on very large aircraft market. The 747 was their cash cow. It funded almost everything else they did. Airbus, frankly, was tired of picking up the scraps in the high-capacity market. But here is a wild piece that usually gets left out of the history. Before they went to war, Boeing and Airbus actually tried to team up. Back in 1993, the two rivals engaged in a joint study of a very large commercial transport. They looked at the global data together and realized the harsh truth. The market for a 500-plus seat aircraft was actually quite small. They figured there was maybe demand for 400 to 500 of these planes globally. The math was brutal. If both companies built a super jumbo, neither would make a profit. But, as you might expect, when you put two aerospace giants in a room, the partnership collapses. Egos slashed, design philosophies fundamentally disagreed, and they walked away. Airbus decided to bet the farm. They greenlit the A380 project, aiming to kill the 747 once and for all. Boeing now had a very expensive choice to make. They could spend roughly $15 to $25 billion to design a clean sheet super jumbo to fight back, or they could set a trap. Enter the 747X. Instead of a brand new plane, Boeing announced a radical, massive modification of their existing 747-400. And the genius of this move wasn't in the aerodynamics, it was in the accounting. Because the 747X was a derivative aircraft, meaning it borrowed heavily from an existing airframe and planned to use off-the-shelf engines from the 777 program. Boeing estimated it would only cost them about $4 billion to develop. Compare that to the $25 billion Airbus was burning on the A380. Boeing was risking pennies on a dollar. This is what industry analysts call the spoiler strategy. Boeing knew the A380 needed to capture almost 100% of the super jumbo market just to break even. If Boeing could convince just a handful of major heavy-hitting carriers, like British Airways, Qantas or Singapore Airlines, to order the much cheaper 747X instead, the A380's business case would completely collapse. Boeing didn't necessarily need the 747X to be the best-selling plane in history. They just needed to fracture the market enough to make Airbus fail. But the battle wasn't just happening in the sky, it was happening on the tarmac. This brings us to the airport infrastructure war. And this is where the genius of the 747X really shows. The Airbus A380 is a remarkably wide airplane. Its wingspan is 79.8 meters. It was designed to push the absolute physical limits of what is known as the 80 by 80 meter box, or ICAO Code F standard. The problem? Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, almost no airports were built for Code F. The global standard for heavy international gates was the 65 by 65 meter box, or Code E, which perfectly fit the 747-400. If airlines bought the A380, it meant airports around the world would have to spend billions digging up taxiways, reinforcing concrete to handle the A380's massive 1.2 million pound weight, and building entirely new multi-million-dollar double-decker boarding bridges. Boeing pitched the 747X as the ultimate plug-and-play alternative. Yes, it was going to be huge, but its wingspan was kept in 69.8 meters. Boeing argued that with just a few minor operational waivers, it could still safely squeeze into those existing 65-meter Code E gates. More importantly, it kept the traditional single main deck boarding doors. Airlines could use the exact same jet bridges they already had. Boeing's pitch was brilliant. Buy the A380 and force your hub airports to spend billions of dollars on concrete. Or buy the 747X, and we just need them to repaint a few lines on the tarmac. Let's put the corporate chess game aside for a second and look at the metal. It would have been an absolute leviathan. We aren't talking about a simple update. The crown jewel of the pitch was the 747X Stretched. This absolute unit was designed to measure in at a staggering 80.2 meters. That is 263 feet from the nose to tail. To put that into perspective, the longest commercial passenger plane flying today is the 747-8 Intercontinental, and that is only 76.3 meters long. The 747X Stretched would have completely drafted it. It would have held the title of the longest commercial passenger aircraft in history. To lift this extra mass, Boeing planned to borrow those massive, high-bypass power plants from the 777 program, specifically derivatives of the Engine Alliance GP7200 or Rolls-Royce Trent engines. They redesigned the wing, extending it to that 69.8 meter span, and kept it with racked wingtips to slice through the air with modern efficiency. The X Stretched was designed to swallow over 500 passengers in a standard 3-class layout. But here is the most fascinating design quirk of the entire project. Boeing couldn't build a full second deck like the A380 without ruining their $4 billion budget. So they got incredibly creative with the empty space above the main cabin. They pitched airlines on using this overhead crown space for secret compartments. They drew up plans for passenger sleeping berths, where you could climb a ladder into a bed-sized pod in the ceiling. They also proposed moving the galleys, the kitchens and the crew rest areas up into this attic. Airlines could free up prestigious main deck floor space for more revenue-generating seats. You would think a plane with these monster specs, low development costs and plug-and-play airport compatibility would have airlines lining up around the block. But the reality? It was a defeating silence. Boeing took the 747X on a massive global roadshow, pitching it to all the heavy hitters. But the airlines just weren't buying the hype. When executives looked at the 747X, they didn't see the future. They saw a 30-year-old design on a life support. It felt like a rehash. The 747X found itself caught in the worst possible middle ground. If carriers wanted sheer efficiency and lower operating costs, they were already falling head over heels of the Boeing 777, a twin-engine marvel that burned way less fuel and required vastly less maintenance than a 4-engine jumbo. And if they wanted unduly rated size and luxury to dominate major hub airports, the Airbus A380 was the shiny, clean-sheet design offering the true double-deck experience. The 747X was not efficient enough to beat the 777, and it wasn't big enough to kill the A380. The final verdict was brutal. Total orders secured for the 747X? 0. Not a single one. It seemed like a spoiler strategy has backfired, leaving Boeing with nothing but a paper plane. But good data never dies. The 747X program was quietly scrapped from the brochures, but the R&D was pure gold. That aerodynamics research on the ranked wingtips, the structural reinforcement required for a massive fuselage stretched, the complex integration of next-gen engine technology, it wasn't thrown in the trash. It was saved on a hard drive in Seattle. Fast forward just a few years, Boeing realized there was still a niche market for a highly efficient, high-capacity freighter and passenger jet. They took that failed 747X technology, combined it with the bleeding-edge tech they were developing for the 787 Dreamliner, and resurrected it. The result? The 747-8 Intercontinental and Freighter. The 747X didn't really die, it just went into hibernation. It served as the essential, necessary rough draft that bridged the gap between the classic 747-400 and the modern efficiency of the 747-8. It kept Boeing's engineering team incredibly sharp on the large structure aerodynamics, and it proved that the iconic 747 airframe still had room to grow. Looking back at the classified files, the 747X is an incredible paradox. It is the plane that never was. Yet, it is the exact reason the Queen of the Skies survived well in the 21st century. As a commercial product in 2000, it failed. But as a strategic weapon and a technological stepping stone, you could argue it was a masterstroke. But it leaves us with one burning what if that still keeps aviation historians up at night. And I really want to hear your take on this. Let's discuss in the comments. If Boeing had actually built the 80-meter 747X stretched in 2000 and aggressively undercut Airbus on price, would the A380 have failed even sooner? If the 747X had stolen just 20 or 30 key orders from the A380 early on, would the entire super jumbo era have collapsed years before it finally did? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and I love seeing your theories. If you enjoyed this discussion, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on. It is the absolute best way to support the channel and ensure you don't miss our next investigations. Thanks for hanging out and talking aviation with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.